Good evening, and welcome to what I hope will be a wonderful study in the book of Acts. We'll be looking at the end of chapter 15 and also all of chapter 16. This is the beginning of Paul's second missionary journey. We read about the other one when we studied Acts 13 and 14. Now we're going to the second missionary journey of St. Paul. Okay, before we go any further, let's go to the Lord in prayer. Okay, in the name of the Father, Son, Holy Spirit. Heavenly Father, thank you so much for tonight. I thank you for this time we can be together to delve deeper into your word. I trust you'll speak to us, and that by means of your Spirit, whom you used to write the word, you will illuminate our minds, our wills, our hearts, so that we can hear you clearly and respond positively to what you're communicating to us tonight. Father, we love you and just pray these things always in the name of your beloved Son, Jesus. In the name of the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. Amen. Just quickly, if you have not read the end of Acts chapter 15 and also chapter 16, I would ask that you turn off the video now and come back and join us after you've read it. Okay, let's quickly recap what we studied last time before we went on the sidebar and looked at the book of Galatians. In Acts chapter 15, we see the great debate on the way a person comes into a saving relationship with God through Jesus. It's finally decided that on the basis of two independent witnesses, that is St. Paul and also of St. Peter, that the church agrees, yes, we are saved only by grace through faith. Now, what is the nature of that faith? We talked about that. Is it just mere mental assent, or is it actually commitment? Is it actually allowing works of Christ actually be produced in and through us? Anyway, but the issue's been settled once for all. We do not have to become Jews in order, first of all, to become Christians. So we don't have to do that. Okay, so after this point, we're seeing that Paul and Barnabas have returned to Antioch, and they are ministering to the church. And while they're there, Paul then suggests to Barnabas that the two of them go and revisit the churches they established on their first missionary journey. The churches that were in Cyprus, the island of Cyprus, and also in central modern-day Turkey, the Roman province of Galatia. Okay. Paul suggests this to Barnabas, and Barnabas responds very positively. Yes, let's do this. Great idea, Paul. Let's go. He says, also, let me go just get John Mark to make sure he can get ready to go on the journey with us. And Paul goes, no, I don't think so. I've already been down that road once with John Mark, and I know he's your cousin and stuff, but he deserted us. And I cannot trust him when things are going good. Can you imagine what he would have done when things got bad? For example, in Lystra when I was stoned, I don't think so. Well, Barnabas is probably going to come back. And again, this is not in the scriptures itself, but look at the two men, who they are and their natures. And this is probably kind of the conversation they had where Barnabas went, wait a minute. I'm a man of faith. I not only believe in Jesus, I have faith in people. And I believe in giving people a second chance. And Paul may have responded, no, this is going far beyond. No, he's already had a chance, etc. And Barnabas may have come right back at him and said, no, Paul, I gave you a second chance. Remember when nobody wanted to associate with you in Jerusalem? None of the apostles did, even though you had spent several years there in Damascus successfully promoting Jesus. I'm the only one who stood up for you. Now, I believe in second chances, and if I gave you a second chance, then I think we should give John Mark a second chance as well. Well, it just doesn't do well. I mean, it really explodes on them, and there may have been some lingering resentment by Paul, and maybe on the part of Barnabas as well, about what had happened in the event that is described in Galatians chapter 2. If you remember in that chapter, we saw where Peter went to Antioch, and he was eating joyfully with all the Christians there, even the Gentile Christians who were not observing kosher laws. And the Judaizers come and they intimidate Peter, and Peter pulls back. At least this is Paul's version of the story. It may be true, but there may be other sides to the story as well. Anyway, Paul doesn't like it, and what even hurts him worse is that Barnabas joins Peter in pulling away from eating with the Gentile Christians at Antioch. But whatever happens, it just blows up on them. And these men, neither one back down. And so the result is this wonderful, wonderful relationship, which has meant so much not only for Christianity, it really brought Paul into the fold more so than any other event, but also it brought Paul into the fold, and it gave Paul a status that he had probably not achieved apart from Barnabas. It was, again, it was Barnabas who embraced him and presented him to the Jerusalem apostles when nobody else would. So it's a sad ending to a wonderful, wonderful relationship that had been so beneficial for Paul and for the church. Okay, at this point, a lot of people like to speculate, well, who's right or who's wrong? I think most people I come into contact with will almost automatically, immediately defend St. Paul. Well, Paul's right. I mean, John Mark did desert them. I mean, that's what it says in the New American Standard version of the Bible. Whenever Paul is describing this issue, maybe Paul thought it was a desertion. I'll just let you know very quickly that that word translated desert really just means he left them. Leaving somebody is not the same connotation as desertion. All right, desertion is pejorative; it's negative. Leaving somebody is just could be very, very neutral. So anyway, who's right, who's wrong? I'm just going to throw in my hat in this discussion very quickly. I think first of all, you need to take into account that Luke does not defend Paul. He doesn't take sides, okay? He doesn't take Barnabas' side. He does not take Paul's side. He just says this is what happened. I think it's very telling there. Remember when you looked earlier at how important Paul is for Luke and for how Luke really has Paul as his hero and structures much of Acts around Paul for various reasons. Many times people think, well, if it weren't for Paul, there would not be any evangelization among the Gentiles. That's not true. When Paul went to Italy, he goes to Rome. We'll see this in chapter 28. There are actually Christians already in Rome before Paul ever got there. Okay, now he furthered this work there, and so did St. Peter, but there were other Christians operating in those areas as well. But again, Paul is going to be the focus of Luke's writings here in Acts. Okay, so first of all, although he's Luke's hero, Luke does not defend Paul. Okay, I think that's very important there. Also, Luke is very complimentary of Barnabas elsewhere. I think Acts 11, chapter 11, verse 24 says a lot. He says that Barnabas was a man, a good man full of faith and of the Holy Spirit. A man of faith. Just like we said a moment ago, that basically, just like he had faith in God, he had faith in people, he had faith in the Apostle Paul. He had faith in John Mark, that John Mark was a young man, he'd get together, and things would be great, okay? And so never is a harmful word spoken about Barnabas. Although he was the leader of the twosome, Paul and Barnabas, apparently he relinquished control and leadership position to Paul, and again was willing to go on this missionary journey with Paul as the leader. So I think it's very important that he only compliments Barnabas, and he doesn't take sides with Paul here. So I think there's more to Barnabas' side than probably we give credit for many times. I think it's also interesting, though, this is that as you look later in Acts, again, you do not hear Barnabas mentioned, neither do you hear John Mark mentioned. But you do find them mentioned elsewhere. For example, Paul will talk about Barnabas in 1 Corinthians 9. This is even after this incident here in Acts chapter 15 is actually during Paul's third missionary journey. And he says, do not Barnabas and I not have a right to take along a living wife? So he's talking present tense. So apparently there may have been some rekindling of that relationship. But also go, though, to First Peter 5, Colossians 4, and also 2 Timothy. You're going to see the name John Mark reappearing. And two of these instances are in Paul's letters. For example, he writes to the church at Colossae that if Barnabas' cousin John Mark comes to you, welcome him. Now, this is written about maybe 7, 8 years after this event that occurred here in Antioch between Barnabas and Paul. So already there's been some restitution, or there's been some reconciliation between Paul and also John Mark. And maybe Paul went, I was too hard on the kid. I was wrong, but I did. Also, you find Mark in Rome in 1 Peter chapter 5, verse 13. Peter's in Rome. We do not know how long Mark spent time there, but apparently it was long enough because so much of his information he used in writing his gospel comes from St. Peter. If you go look in the Gospel of Mark, whenever it mentions Peter, you will find more detail in those little areas than you find elsewhere, except for the Matthew 16 passage where you're the Christ is Son of the living God, and he says, you're Peter. Okay, upon this rock I build my church. Okay, but other than that, you find so much detail. So you're seeing John Mark is now not only associated with Paul, but also with Peter. Okay, last thing is this, is that Paul is about to die. Most New Testament scholars of a conservative bent really believe that 2 Timothy is written in Paul's second imprisonment there in Rome, and that he's about to be executed. He's going to be beheaded. And he writes to Timothy, and it's a very sad letter when you find out all the, look at all the nuances, how he says, I'm alone. Nobody has supported me. Towards the end of the letter, he will say, only Luke is with me. Out of all these Christians, only Luke is with me. Then he says, pick up Mark and bring him with you, for he is useful to me for service. So I think it's wonderful that you're seeing a reconciliation, at least on the part of Paul and also John Mark, and most likely also between Barnabas and also Paul, although it's never specifically described in either Acts or Paul's letters. So at this point, Paul is going to select Silas to go with him. Barnabas will go again with John Mark, and John Mark and Barnabas will go to the island of Cyprus again. This is the home of Barnabas, so it's understandable that they would go to Cyprus. And Paul, on the other hand, will take Silas, and they will go then to the churches of the Roman province of Galatia. Now, it's really interesting what happens here. God is very creative. The very first verse of the Bible says, in the beginning God created heavens and the earth. It means he's creative. If you go look at just the earth itself, look at all the varieties, all the different species of animals, insects, my word, birds. It's incredible. God is very creative. And God shows his greatness many times, not by manipulating us, not by forcing us, but by working creatively through our solutions, through our situations. Now, look what he did here with choosing a companion for Paul. It is Silas. Now, who is Silas? Remember earlier in chapter 15, we saw that James selected Silas to be one of the two men who would represent him and the Jerusalem church in the church at Antioch, presenting the decree, saying, yes, we're saved by grace through faith, and please honor these 4 restrictions. This will help create peace between the Jewish Christians and Gentile Christians in these other areas. Now, I believe this is very important for the reason is that if Paul had taken somebody else into these churches and said, this is the decree, the Judaizers might have said, no, we don't think so. We know James. We were with James. We represent James. And so therefore these decrees are not from James, Jerusalem church. Paul's fabricated these decrees. But by taking Silas, who was an official representative, without doubt, of James and the Jerusalem church, that accusation, that challenge will not stand. So the result is, it's good that Silas is going to go with him to back up and support, yes, that this is the decree from the Jerusalem church, and therefore no more discussion, no more debate on how a person is actually saved. Let's look at another way, though, how God is so creative when we make a mess of things. And Paul and Barnabas made a mess of things, okay? In the relationship, God, again, is so creative. At first, when Paul suggested to Barnabas to go on this second missionary journey, it would just be the two of them, maybe John Mark as well, for one missionary journey. Now you have 4 people going on a total of 2 missionary journeys. So you have 2 missionary journeys and 4 labors instead of 2, so it's been doubled. I think one of the good things is that, it's understandable that, again, Barnabas went to Cyprus. But by Paul not going to Cyprus, he doesn't have to spend time in Cyprus, and he can take that same time and apply it in other countries, other provinces of the Roman Empire where Christ has not been preached. So it is wonderful how God, again, takes our message. This is not to exonerate neither Paul nor Barnabas, but God uses their situation to further his kingdom. Now, look what happens here as Paul goes and revisits some of the churches he and Barnabas founded on the first missionary journey. If you look at this map, about on the right-hand side, go about 2/3 of the way up, you'll see the city of Antioch. Again, this is the home church. This is the church which launched Paul and Barnabas, and now will launch Paul and Silas for their second missionary journey. What they're going to do is they are going to go in the exact opposite order of visiting the churches that Barnabas and Paul had originally established. For example, Paul and Barnabas had gone to Cyprus first, and then north to Pisidian Antioch, then east or to the right to Iconium, then Lystra and Derbe. Paul and Silas, on the other hand, will go up north from Antioch, skip the sea. They'll take the land route, go through Cilicia, which again is the province which has Paul's hometown of Tarsus. So it's very likely they went to Tarsus as well. They'll go kind of north up into the Cilician gates, and then go west into the cities, again, of Derbe, Lystra, Iconium, and Antioch, the exact opposite order in which Paul and Barnabas had established the cities. Now they go, and they're again a decree from the Jerusalem church. But when Paul arrives in Lystra, he finds there is a young convert by the name of Timothy, who is well spoken of, well respected by the churches of Lystra and also Iconium. And Paul wants Timothy now to go with him on the rest of the journey. He wants to mentor Timothy. Although Paul was never married, you look at his letters, and he mentions so many people. He was a people person. He was very much also a mentor, and he wanted to reach out to Timothy, not only to maybe use him as an assistant, and he will assist Paul in many different ways in his missionary journeys and later on in prison, but also to mentor him so that he can carry on the work after Paul has died. And this is one of the purposes that Paul wrote 2 Timothy. All seems good, but there's a problem. The problem is that Timothy, although he is the son of a Greek father, he's a Jew. The reason is his mother and grandmother, Lois and Eunice, are Jews. Well, why does that make him a Jew? According to Jewish law, it's the racial identity of your mother that determines your racial identity, that racial identity of the children. Now, why is that? 2,000 years ago, we did not have DNA tests. You could not be for sure who the father was, and you felt very confident, but you could not ever guarantee that. On the other hand, you always knew who the mother was. So therefore, they said the only way we can guarantee who you are racially, we have to look at the mother's racial identity. So Timothy is a Jew. What's the problem with that? Well, none, except he's not circumcised. Well, wait a minute now. That should not matter. I mean, come on. I mean, was that issue not settled in the Jerusalem conference? They were saved by grace through faith and not by works of the law, especially circumcision. Yes, that was settled, but that's not the issue here. This is not a salvation issue. Timothy is already saved. He's already a son of God. It is a ministry issue. Paul wants to be effective in ministry. Now, if he's always having to put out unnecessary battles, fight unnecessary battles, put out unnecessary fires, he's going to do that so he can focus on what he really wants to focus on. You see, Paul wants to focus on sharing the gospel. Okay, we're saved by grace through faith. Now, if Timothy, Paul, and Silas go into a synagogue, and the Jews there know that Timothy is a Jew and has not been circumcised, they do communicate. these ancient church synagogues had networks of communication, and they would know, well, there walks in Timothy, and the first thing they'd say is, hey, he's a Jew, he's not circumcised. And the focus would be on Timothy not being circumcised. So Paul goes, I want to get that out of the way. Let's just take care of this. Not saying it has anything to do with salvation, but basically I don't want that to be the focus. I don't want it to be a distraction when we go to these different synagogues. So he's going to ask Timothy to be circumcised, and Timothy's going to say, yes, he agrees to it, so that he will not be a stumbling block as he goes to these synagogues. And they show the gospel. Now, I read one person that said, it's just a little snip of the flesh, no big deal. Well, where did he get that from? If you go read the story of Jacob's sons and his daughter Dinah, the men of Shechem had a young man there who wanted to marry Dinah. Okay. And the brothers go, okay, you can marry her, but you and all the men of your village have got to be circumcised. So the man wants to marry Dinah. In good faith, he goes and not only has him circumcised, but all the men in the village circumcised. The story says on the third day, when the men were in great pain and agony, that's when the betrayal occurred, and the sons of Jacob go and they slaughter all the men in the city, because they went, there's no way this uncircumcised dog is going to marry our sister. So therefore, this was a sacrifice on Timothy's part. We need to commend Timothy for this sacrifice that he made so that he could be effective in sharing the gospel. Okay, so now Paul and Barnabas, Paul and Silas, and also Timothy, they are now at Lystra, and they're going to go heading west. Now it looks like what Paul wants to do, it says he wants to go to Asia, but he's thwarted. Now why does he want to go to Asia? Now Asia is the name of the Roman province in the southwestern part of modern-day Turkey. There's a major city there. Its name is Ephesus. And Paul's strategy was always to go to these major cities in these provinces, establish a church in the major city, and then from that church would then serve as the mother church with satellite churches around it, so that would be the base of operations for evangelism and for training, etc., for these other satellite churches. You see this, for example, in Asia, in the first chapter of Revelation, in which we see that Paul writes the letter of Revelation first to the church at Ephesus, the mother city church, and also then Smyrna, Pergamum, Thyatira, Sardis, Philadelphia, and Laodicea. Okay, it's like the church at Ephesus, like the cathedral, the seat of the bishop, and we have parish churches in these other outlying cities. Paul, though, is thwarted. He cannot go there, so he's going to go into Mysia, which is the northwest corner of modern-day Turkey. Again, he's thwarted going there. So he's going to try to go even further northeast to the province of Bithynia. It's a very developed area. Many Greek cities are there, very cultured, but Paul again is thwarted going there. Now, just very quickly, let me tell you something. There is a city there in Bithynia, and the city's name is Byzantium. For those of you who know your church history, Byzantium later was chosen by Constantine the Great, the Roman emperor, to be the new capital for the Roman Empire. And so, although Paul did not get to go there, that city can play a major role later in Christianity. Now, as we said, Paul and Barnabas and also Timothy are thwarted in going in ministry in these three major provinces on the western shores of modern-day Turkey. Now, what thwarted them? Well, we don't hear about any impressions through prayer. We don't hear about any visions given to Paul, telling him not to go in these areas. It looks like there are circumstances that prevented Paul and Silas and Timothy from going and ministering in these areas. I like what C.S. Lewis said. He said that many times circumstances are the indicators of what God's will really is. See, many times we have these impressions. We go, well, that's God's will, and that's what God wants, and I just know it, etc. But sometimes these impressions actually may not be coming from God. They may be coming from our own selfish nature. So therefore, how can we be sure these impressions are from God or not? Many times it depends upon what happens afterwards. You feel this impression, well, you feel this is God's will, but is that what actually ends up happening? If circumstances don't change and what you believe to be God's will does not happen, it probably was not God's will. It was just your own personal feelings, your own personal impressions, not really from God. So take circumstances very seriously. Now, Paul there is in Troas. Troas is called Alexandria. Troas is actually established there by Alexander the Great. It was actually just 4 miles south of the ancient city of Troy. We'll come back to that in a moment. But they're in Troas, just 4 miles south of the ancient city of Troy. You remember the story of the Iliad, the Odyssey, Ulysses, and also Achilles, Hector. Okay, the burning of Troy. So there's Paul there on the western shores there near Troy, and he has a vision. And there's a young man from Macedonia who appears to him and says, come over into Macedonia and help us. And at that point, Paul knows what God's will is. He's been thwarted. Circumstances have thwarted him from ministering these other areas because God had a new mission field for him to go to. It was to be the Roman province of Macedonia. I think it's really neat now that Paul is receiving this vision while he and his companions are there at Troas, near Troy. It was at Troy in which the West invaded the East. It's in the place where Achilles, Agamemnon, also the Greek forces go, and they are going to conquer and really destroy Troy, this ancient city. It is here where now the East, though, is going to invade the West. 1,000 years after the fall of Troy, the East will now invade the West. Paul and his entourage, they plan on going and conquering the West. But whereas Achilles went to conquer and destroy, we now have Paul and his group going to conquer and to save. It's also really interesting. It's here that we see the first passage of 3 in the book of Acts in which we see the narrator saying, we then went over into Macedonia. The we there is indicating that the author of Acts is actually now with Paul in this part of his missionary journeys. Since we know the author of the book of Acts to be Luke, it is here that Luke is actually going to join Paul and Silas and Timothy on this part of the missionary. Now, Paul and the 3 companions are going to take a boat from Troas, and they will, after one day, land on the island of Samothrace, which is in the middle of the Aegean Sea between Macedonia and also the Roman province of Mysia. The next day they'll get a boat and they'll finish the journey and they'll land then at Neapolis on the European continent. This is the port town for Philippi. It actually means in Greek, new town, Neos meaning new and polis meaning town or city. So it's like Newton, okay, the new town. Paul and the 3 now head for Philippi. Luke would tell us that, that Philippi is actually a Roman colony. By that he means that it is a free city. It enjoys many of the privileges that the other cities in the Roman Empire did not enjoy because they are not Roman colonies. They're not free cities. It's going to be heavily settled by Romans themselves, most likely Roman soldiers who have retired, Roman army officers who have retired as well. It's going to be very, very, very Roman. Now, being very, very Roman means they're very proud of being Roman, but also beneath the surface there bubbles some anti-Semitism. Basically, this resentment against the Jews. Now, the Jews were very influential in the Roman Empire. We'll see later, towards the end of Acts, that there were 2 Jewish women, sisters, who are going to play a role in Paul's life later on. We'll look at this, and they were very, very influential in the upper echelons of Roman society. We'll see that later. But anyway, there's still lingering resentment against the Jews for whatever reason, and we'll see this bubble up through the surface in just a moment. Now, there's another interesting fact about Philippi. That Philippi was established because of an important event that occurred there. What we're having is that the assassins of Julius Caesar, about 80 years earlier, had fled to Macedonia, and there at Philippi, they defended themselves against the armed forces of a man later called Caesar Augustus and also Mark Antony. And the two leaders of the resistance of the assassins were Brutus and Cassius. And there, Caesar Augustus and also Mark Antony will achieve a great battle against Brutus and Cassius. Brutus will commit suicide. Okay, so important history there, and very proud of the Roman heritage. And this is the area that Paul and the three will evangelize first on the European continent. Now, when Paul and Silas, Timothy, and Luke get into Philippi, they're going to discover there's no synagogue there. The reason is there are apparently not 10 Jewish men living in Philippi. Jewish law mandated that in order for a synagogue to be able to be constructed, to have a synagogue, you had to have at least 10 Jewish men. Now, you could have 100 Jewish women, but if there are not 10 Jewish men, you cannot have a synagogue. So there's no synagogue there. So Paul and the three, they surmise correctly that if there are any worshipers of God according to the Jewish religion, they will be worshiping on the Sabbath at the river Ganges, which is just outside the city of Philippi. The reason that go worship at the river is that the rites of purification are very important in Judaism. So there's a lot of water there. So therefore, if there are any worshipers of God from Judaism, they are going to be there by the riverside. And Paul is not disappointed. He'll find a group of women there, most likely led by Lydia. Now, who is Lydia? Remember, we said God is very creative. We'll see how creative he is in just a moment. Lydia is a successful businesswoman. It appears everything shows she's been successful. She is involved in selling purple dye. This, again, is the dye that was used by the Roman aristocracy before their robes. It's called the royal purple. Okay, she's also a worshiper of God. She's most likely not racially a Jew, but she has associated herself with the Jewish synagogue. Also, it says she's from the city of Thyatira. Where is Thyatira located? It is located in the Roman province of Mysia. Remember, that was the area that Paul wanted to evangelize, but was thwarted most likely by circumstances. Okay, you see how God is creative? Paul felt it was God's will for Mysia to be evangelized. It was. It was just not God's will for Paul to do the evangelization of Mysia. He's going to use Lydia, who'll go back and forth between Philippi and also Thyatira, and use her to help evangelize that province. So God's will is going to be done, but he does it very, very creatively. Never doubt that God cannot get his will done. The question is, do we want to participate in him getting his will done? Well, anyway, Paul is preaching, and as he preaches, it says the Lord opened Lydia's heart in faith to receive positively what Paul is preaching about. So she is baptized, not only her, but her entire household. They all believe together, all baptized together. I'm going to come back a little bit later to this idea of the household being baptized, and does this relate in any way to infant baptism? Okay. Well, now, Lydia knows that Paul and the three are new to town. They don't have any lodging, so she says, hey, y'all come and stay at my household. Apparently, it's a big household. Again, she's wealthy. And Paul looks like, it seems like he resists at first. It doesn't look good, whatever. And Lydia just played her trump card. She went, Paul, if you really believe I've been saved, you'll come and let me show hospitality to you. Well, he can't turn it down now. I mean, that was kind of unfair. But anyway, he's going to agree for him and the other three to stay with her while in their time in Philippi. Now, this may actually have come back to bite him. Why is that? Later on, we'll read in 1 Thessalonians chapter 2 that the Jews of the synagogues in that area, Thessalonica especially, they're going to accuse Paul of being sensual, of using immorality, impurity in order to attract people. And who would he attract? He's a man, women. And word may have gotten out about Lydia. Goes, you see, that's what happened here. And that may have been some of the background for the accusation against Paul. Again, it's innocent. Paul did nothing wrong. But again, it is probably the background for this accusation against Paul later on in 1 Thessalonians chapter 2. Now, Paul and Timothy, Silas, and also Luke are constantly working these women, going to the river there and sharing Christ, mentoring them, discipling them. And they're constantly being followed by a slave girl. Now, Luke tells us that this slave girl has a spirit of divination within her. Actually, it's called the spirit of Python, the snake. Now, this snake was associated with the Greek god Apollo, who is known to be the god of telling people's fortunes. And so she would tell people's fortunes, but she's demon-possessed, and she keeps going behind Paul and Silas and the other two, saying, these are men of God who have come to you to proclaim the word of salvation. Listen to them, this kind of stuff. Well, she was telling the truth, all right? But just like Jesus before him, Paul did not want the witness of demons. Did not want it, okay? They could actually be used against them. So after several times, who knows how many days, Paul finally gets annoyed, and he turns around and he heals the girl. I just want to ask Paul this in heaven. Why did you wait for her to annoy you before you healed her? Why not heal her the first time or whatever? Anyway, she's healed, which is great. Good news for the young girl. Her masters are not so happy. They're not. They're not happy at all. Why? Because they were using her, having her tell people's fortunes, this demon, etc., and they were making money off of her, and now their hope of profit was gone, and they are upset. The owners of the slave girl are so upset that they're going to hold Paul and Silas, not the other two apparently, before the chief magistrates. Look what they do here. They play the race card, okay? People playing the race card today is nothing new. It's been going on for quite some time. What happens is they do not tell the whole story to the chief magistrates. They don't say, hey, we had a slave girl there and he exorcised her, etc. They go, no, we are Romans. You know us. We're Romans. And these are just dirty Jews. And you know what? They've come here and they're upsetting us, trying to promote anti-Roman customs, subverting, Roman culture, etc. And they need to be punished. Well, that's all they had to say. Again, this is a very, very Roman city. And apparently the magistrates did not give Paul and Silas time to respond, or if they did, Paul did not use his trump card. We'll talk about that in a moment. Basically, the magistrates hear the accusations and they pronounce verdict, you're guilty, and they sentence them to being beaten with rods. We don't know how many times they were beaten with a rod, but they're going to be beaten with rods. At this point, they're going to summon the jailer and say, we want you to take Paul and Silas, and we want you to secure them very tightly. In fact, the jailer takes this so seriously, he's going to put Paul and Silas in the innermost recesses of the jail and put them in stocks, hands and feet in stocks. This way, to doubly make sure that they are not going to escape. So the jailer now goes to bed. Prison house is all locked up. He's good to go. And while he's in bed asleep, Paul and Silas are singing hymns of praise to God. And this is stunning, maybe to us, but really for those prisoners in the jail with them. In fact, it says they're listening to Paul and Silas as they're singing praises to God. Now, why would they sing praises to God? They're in jail. I mean, should they be whining? What happened to the book of Job, poor pitiful me for 36 out 40 chapters in the book of Job, he's whining, all right? They're not whining, they're singing praises to God. I think it's because of love. You know, Jesus loved us so much, he sacrificed himself for us. And so I think it's neat when we do get to be sacrificed or sacrifice ourselves for Jesus. We know this when we do this for our own family. I mean, there are times, I'm sure, that you spouses, you sacrifice something for your spouse, your wife or your husband. And you didn't really think of it as a sacrifice. You just went, I just love him, you know? If this is what it means to show love, then I'm willing to do this. Or about your children. There are things probably you don't have because you made sure that your children have more things. I remember my mother. I've been told, you know, mom and dad didn't have a lot of money until the early 70s. Until then, I mean, mother many times would go years without getting a new coat, a new dress, because she made sure her children were well fitted for school, and she could not fit us for school well, and then also get a new dress. And I don't think she ever resented that. It's just love. And that's what love does. And so love doesn't mind being sacrificed for the loved one or sacrificing oneself for the loved one. In fact, we'll see in this instance that Paul and Silas are singing praises to Jesus, to the Father. Now, apparently, though, the singing is so bad that it causes an earthquake. And the prison doors they just burst open, chains fall off the prisoners' hands or feet, and the jailer is aroused from sleep by the earthquake. He sees the prison doors open, and he naturally assumes the prisoners have escaped. So what he does, he's going to take a sword, he's going to fall upon it and kill himself. Why? Because if any prisoner has escaped, the magistrates will have him put to death. Basically, if a jailer lost a prisoner, he was to take the place of the prisoner and be executed instead. Well, this ensured that jailers would not accept bribes and release prisoners. And that was probably the major motivation behind this practice. But he does not want to embarrass his family, he had him humiliated, so he's going to take a sword and kill himself. But Paul shouts out, he says, wait, stop, we're all here. Do not kill yourself. Now this stuns the jailer, because who would stay in jail when they have a chance to escape? Okay, he calls for lights, rushes in. He sees Paul and Barnabas. He says, Paul and Silas, he says, Sirs, what must I do to be saved? Now, what led him to make that claim? Well, maybe for the several days that Paul and Silas had been preaching in Philippi, he had heard Paul and Silas preaching about the way of salvation. And therefore, he knew enough to know that there is a chance here to be saved. Also, because of the way Paul and Silas responded to this event, he went, these men must have something divine operating in them. Because everybody else I would have met in my life, they would have escaped and I would have been put to death. So out of sheer amazement, he knows God is working here, and so therefore he asks how to be saved. Paul and Silas share. It says not only he, but also his entire household is saved, and they will be baptized. So the Roman jailer and his family are all saved. The whole household is baptized. And it's great. The jailer brings out food after he washes Silas and Paul of their wounds and feeds them and rejoices greatly with his family, his whole household. Okay, it's the next day. The chief magistrates go, okay, we're feeling magnanimous. Let's send word to the jailer that it's okay to release Paul and Silas. We're good with this. So they send the policeman to the jailer and give him the message. And he, in turn, goes to Paul and Silas and say, hey, guys, great news. The chief magistrates had said, you're free to go. It's wonderful. At this point, Paul quotes the great sportscaster, Lee Corso. When the jailer says, Paul and Silas, The magistrates have said that you're free to go. Paul says, not so fast. Not so fast. Here's a problem. The chief magistrates did not realize that when they beat us, that they were beating Roman citizens. It is against Roman law for Roman citizens to be beaten with rods. You could not crucify a Roman citizen. You could behead them. It was swifter. It was painless. You cannot beat them with rods. Rome finds out, these magistrates are in serious trouble. No. What you do, you go tell the policeman to give this message to the chief magistrates. You're going to come here and you're going to ask us to leave the city, and you will escort us out of this prison. So the policemen return to the chief magistrates. They give the message, and the chief magistrates, they're about to die. They know that they're royally screwed up. So they're going to go to Paul, and they're going to beg Paul and Silas, please leave the jail and please leave the city. They're afraid what would happen if the other Roman citizens in the town found out what had happened. Well, why did Paul do this? Was it for revenge? No. That's not Paul. Vengeance is mine, says the Lord. He will say this. No, you don't take revenge. It was basically, first of all, for the sake of the Roman magistrates. What they did was bad for them. They acted recklessly. We do not want to be reckless. We cause so much damage, not only the lives of others, but also being a wrecking ball ourselves can actually end up damaging ourselves as well. This is an act of mercy that Paul and Silas need to impress upon them. You should never, ever do this again. Not only for their sakes, though, but also for the sake of future prisoners for brought on trial, people who are being accused. It should never, ever happen again. And I think the magistrates got the message. And I think also maybe Paul had not mentioned this at the trial. But guess what? He'll never forget it, because when they try this on him again, he's going to pull out this trump card and say, you don't treat me this way. I am a Roman prisoner. So the chief magistrates come, and they are going to escort Paul out of the prison. Paul and Silas and Timothy and Luke will then go to the house of Lydia. They'll encourage the brethren. And from there, they'll depart, and they'll go west. You see Philippi on the map here. They'll go west to Thessalonica. We'll pick on that next week. It's really interesting. We're not going to look at Philippians now, but this is going to be a major church in Paul's ministry. Lydia is wealthy. There are probably other wealthy people there who had converted to Christianity, and they're going to be a major source of financial support for St. Paul, especially when he gets to Corinth later on in this missionary journey. Okay, what are some takeaways we can get from this first part of Paul's second missionary journey? The first one is this, is that the gospel is for everyone. It's for everyone. Look who's being saved here. A Greek businesswoman, a demon-possessed girl, slave girl, and a Roman jailer. The top of the business world, a member of a regime that's oppressing God's people. A slave girl is demon-possessed. You cannot get a greater variety of representations of different peoples than you have these three. Bottom line, if God is going to choose them for salvation, he's going to choose us as well. In fact, Paul says this in 1 Timothy chapter 1. He said, here's the reason why God chose me for salvation. He said, I am the chief of sinners. At one point he said, I'm just as much an apostle as everybody, these other original 12. Later he'll say, I'm the least of the apostles in 1 Corinthians 15 because I persecuted the church of God. Here, though, he says, I'm just the chief of sinners. The older he got, the more humble he got in who he really was. He said, God chose me because if he chose me, who murdered Christians, who tried to stamp out the church, he'll save anybody. All they have to do is respond in faith to Christ Jesus. So this should give us encouragement. God wants us all to be saved. Last is this. Twice now we see in this chapter we see the whole households are being saved. Now, the whole house being saved, being mentioned here, may make some people very uncomfortable, especially those coming from a conservative evangelical background. Catholics look at this and go, these verses, these instances harmonize with our views on infant baptism. Now, the Catholics are not the only ones who do infant baptism. Lutherans do, Episcopalians, Presbyterians, and also the Greek Orthodox Church. So you're looking at of the 2.2 billion Christians, you're looking at anywhere about 1.8 billion Christians believe in infant baptism. And passages like this are going to harmonize with the claim that children should be baptized as well. You go, well, it doesn't necessarily prove it. It does not. It does not necessarily prove it, but it does harmonize with it. We do know this, though. The generation that came after the apostles, we know they did baptize their children. Irenaeus, the great saint of Lyon, France, he was baptized as a baby by a disciple of John the Apostle. In fact, we know it was so widespread that at the end of the 2nd century, Tertullian saying we should not be doing this. Well, it's been going on for a long time. The question is, did this happen during the days of the apostles? And there are many indications, especially because it was so widespread, that second generation of Christians, that it'd be very unusual if the apostles themselves did not baptize babies. You go, now, why would they do that, though? Okay, the fact that you're asking that question indicates that you're coming from a Western culture, Western tradition background. Okay, is your Western culture, your Western civilization, cultural background, that is what's shaping your mindset that even leads you to ask that question. In the West, as opposed to the East, there is a huge, probably overemphasis on individualism. Okay, we are individuals. We will stand one day personally before God and give an account for the lives that we have led. That's true. But we're also part of a corporation, of a body. We are connected with one another. In the East especially, for example, a man is defined as being the son of somebody. For example, they'll say Jesus, son of Joseph and Mary. We're identified as being the husband of somebody, the father of somebody. It means we're a part of a body. There's a corporate relationships here in life. We're relational oriented, and our identity goes along with that. The very idea in the East of a father, and Christianity starts in the East, the very idea of a father becoming a Christian and a whole household not embracing Christianity is just unfathomable back then. Where the father, the head led, the whole household went. Slaves, for example, we see Lydia, her whole household, the jailer, his whole household immediately became Christians. They had not been whatever. It's just immediate. And so therefore, it's this idea of corporateness, that we're all related with one another, especially in the families. This whole idea of individuality and overemphasis comes from Martin Luther, and really is emphasized to even a greater degree by René Descartes, the famous French philosopher of the 1600s. So anyway, again, these verses don't prove that we are to have infant baptism, but they definitely harmonize with it. And by the 2nd century AD, the second generation of Christians, that is the norm for Christianity. Okay, hope you join with me next time. It'll be looking at chapter 17 of the book of Acts, and we'll see the further stages of Paul's second missionary journey.